on the internet, there are no borders and there is no
Yeah,
distance. And
yeah.
so every attacker is your neighbor.
Mm.
The barbarians are at the doorstep. If an attacker attacks 1,000 times, the defender needs to be successful in stopping all 1,000 attacks. But the
Mm.
attacker only needs to be successful in getting in
Once.
one of those 1,000 attacks.
Yeah,
So we call that
true.
the defender's a dilemma.
I learned very early in my career as a journalist covering cybersecurity at times that the cyber criminals are always ahead of the curve. They will come up with something, and then the rest of the world has to sort of react to it.
So AI is not just reducing their workload, but it's making their job interesting, more interesting because now they can focus on, the higher order 20% decision making. Just because you have an intrusion doesn't yet mean you have impact. There's still a lot of work for the attacker to do before there's impact once they're in your environment.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Our Own Devices. We're going to talk about, again, a lot of AI, but we will have an angle that is actually becoming very interesting. It's becoming a little bit mysterious because we really don't know what we are entering. And we're going to talk about security, cybersecurity in the time of AI. Um, and to talk about it, we have with us Steve Ledzian, who's the CTO of APAC in Japan for Google Cloud Security at Mandiant. Steve, welcome to the show.
Great. So happy to be here. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
So, Steve, before we start, could you explain the concept of Google Cloud Security at Mandiant?
Sure. Let me. I think probably everyone's familiar with Google Cloud as a hyperscaler, and
Yes.
within Google Cloud, we have many security offerings which help to protect Google Cloud, but also organizations who are in a multi-cloud deployment. And that's probably well familiar to many of your listeners. So let me spend instead a little bit more time talking about Mandiant, which they might be less familiar with.
Yeah.
So Mandiant is most well known as a cyber incident response firm. So when everything goes wrong and an attacker is successful in intruding into an organization, they've been the victim of a cyber attack, and they discover that cyber attack. Often, the cyber attack is still going on. The attacker is still in their network, and that victim needs to figure out what happened. What did the attacker do? What information did they steal? How much access do they have? Who is the attacker? What's their motivation? And once they understand what happened, they need to understand what to do about it. And that's what Mandiant assists organizations with. So we do hundreds of thousands of hours, man hours every year responding to cyber attacks. Some of these are financially motivated cyber attacks. Some of them are nation state, espionage motivated cyber attacks. And we've been doing this since 2004. So we have a wealth of information on who the attackers are and how they operate. And so incident response is what we're most well known for, but it's not the only thing we do. When you respond to attackers that much, you come to know them. And that information is very useful on the proactive side rather than the reactive side. And so we also have threat intelligence services, as well as a whole bunch of proactive services like tabletop exercise, security program assessments, red team exercises, and so on. So that's how to think of Mandiant in a nutshell. About 2 3 years ago, Mandiant was acquired by Google. It was the second largest acquisition Alphabet has ever done, and so now Mandiant is well on its journey, being integrated into Google Cloud Security.
Steve, if I can ask you, I learned very early in my career as a journalist covering cybersecurity at times that the cyber criminals are always ahead of the curve. They will come up with something, and then the rest of the world has to sort of react to it. Is AI sort of giving them this superpower now? And is that also like, is that same AI giving you also the superpower to be maybe, to in a way predict what could happen? So how is this cat and mouse game panning out now?
Yeah, so I agree. It is very much a cat and mouse game. Uh, Attackers will innovate, defenders respond to that,
Yeah.
attackers respond to that, and so on and so forth. And so then if we think about AI, how is AI affecting that dynamic? So I would say yes, attackers are using AI in a number of ways. Uh, you know, in one probably one of the ways that's easiest to understand is around phishing, right? So when an
Yeah.
attacker tries to socially engineer someone through an email set of instructions, um, we call that phishing. And often those phishing messages have, the telltale signs of spelling errors or typos or grammatical errors. And those are one way that you can get a tip off that maybe this email isn't legitimate. AI generates beautifully articulate text. And so we can expect that
Yeah.
attackers will use AI to remove those telltale signs that we all previously used as a way to identify these phishing scams. We also see attackers using AI for deepfakes, artificial video, artificial audio, again, related to social engineering, but sometimes related to information operations as well. Um, but that's on the offense side. And then so if
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
pivot to, well, what about the defenders? The defenders are benefiting from AI as well in a number of ways, particularly in the security operations center. So I think what AI is really good at is removing the repetitive toil, some use cases that often bog down security analysts in the SOC. And across the world, we have a talent gap. Organizations are struggling to find cyber talent, and what AI does is it lets those analysts, rather than start at 0%, start at 80% of a task, because the AI has
Okay.
done the first 80% of the work for them. And that 80% is often, again, the work that's very kind of toil related, right? Not so interesting. And so you'll hear all the time things like alert fatigue and analyst burnout. And so AI is not just reducing their workload, but it's making their job interesting, more interesting, because now they can focus on, the higher order 20% decision making. And there's a number of ways specifically to do that. We can see that at Google, for example, we're using AI so that analysts can create SOAR playbooks. We're using AI for investigation. We're using AI for summarization across threat intelligence assets. And we're stepping towards, as much as possible, the SOC being more automated than what we've seen in the past, ultimately, hopefully leading to an autonomous SOC altogether.
Or large corporations have over the years invested a lot of money in ensuring that they have the right cybersecurity policy in place, teams in place, software in place. But is this AI threat and this new AI layer making that redundant, or is it possible to just integrate AI into whatever they already have? Or are we talking about maybe putting in place a completely new set of measures to tackle the new threats?
Yeah, I think AI augments what we already have, right? The processes may be the same, but they're more automated by AI. And so you're getting those efficiency gains.
Yeah.
Whereas before, again, you had alert fatigue, you had a lot of toil happening in the SOC. And so I wouldn't say that AI completely changes what we do, it changes how we do it.
Okay. And are companies you know, I guess you would be interacting with a lot of large corporations, for instance. Are they really aware of the evolving, I'm not saying changed, because it is still evolving, the evolving threat landscape. Uh, and how are those conversations going? Are they really keen on understanding the challenge as well as the opportunity? Because there is an opportunity for them to maybe, ultimately get to a fully autonomous, as you said.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of ways to answer that question. Cybersecurity moves very fast.
Yeah.
The threats that you see, the campaigns that you see, they're happening every day, every week, and so to stay on top of that is quite difficult. AI, I think, moves even faster. the innovations in AI are very rapid. So there's a lot to keep up with when we think about the intersection of cybersecurity and AI. How are organizations doing? It depends on what level we're talking about. We're talking about the operational level, or are we talking about the executive level? One of the trends that I've seen, which I think maybe is an area for improvement, is that a lot of times executives and even maybe board members have this sense that, look, I'm not a cyber professional. If there was an incident, I could never put my hands on the keyboard and assist in the forensics or the remediation. They feel like they don't have a part or a role to play in the event of a cyber attack. And I would say, actually, in fact, that's completely wrong. The business decision making that needs to be done in a cyber attack is, in fact, probably the most important part of the response. And so I think these business leaders need to take a close look at what's happening with cyber attacks. And again, no one's going to ask them to do anything technical, but the areas of business decision making, we have to truly believe and understand that cyber attacks are not a technology problem; they're a business
Mm.
problem, right?
Yeah.
And if anyone's questioning that, just look at any of the high profile breaches. Who's addressing the public and the media and the customers? It's the CEO. It's not
Yeah.
the CISO, right?
Yeah.
And that's because the impact is a business impact. And so there very much is a role to play for the business leaders in a cyber attack. And that role needs to be practiced, right? You don't want to
Mm.
go into that decision making cold. And so
Yeah.
one of the things we've seen a lot of organizations benefit from are tabletop exercises. These are role plays where we sit down, non-technical, and we
Okay.
role play the decision making. It might turn out that, the legal team has a difference of opinion on what to say about the incident and how much to say and when to say it than the PR team. And you want
Yeah.
to find those differences in the leadership team ahead of the crisis, not in an actual crisis. And that's what a
Yeah.
tabletop exercise does. So, back to the origin of your question, how ready I think are these teams is they're aware of it, but there are things they can do, especially at the more senior levels, to become more ready than they possibly are.
It is not a new thing to say that cybersecurity needs to be proactive and not reactive. But is AI actually giving you a new opportunity in being really proactive? Because in the other use cases of AI, one of the things that we have seen is that it can actually predict a lot of use cases, right? Because it goes through a set of possibilities and tells you maybe which of these possibilities have a high probability.
Mhm.
So are these kind of use cases in play? Are companies aware that you can maybe now be more proactive in this case and be better equipped for the future?
Well, I guess let's before I answer that directly, let's dance around the terms a little bit.
Yeah.
So proactive and reactive. But my thinking on that is you actually need to have both. I think if
Mhm.
you rewound 10 years ago, there was a mindset that was very much around prevention and proactive activity. And in those years, when attackers were successful in breaking into the organizations, they were never spotted.
Yeah.
They remained in those organizations for months or sometimes even years because no one was thinking of response. I think more recently we've had a lot of detection and response technologies, EDR, NDR, MDR, all of these detection and response technologies that start providing value when you have a prevention failure, when you have an intrusion. And those technologies are meant to spot that prevention failure quickly and intercept it and do something about it before there's impact. Because just because you have an intrusion doesn't yet mean you have impact. There's still a lot of work for the attacker to do before there's impact once they're in your environment. And so, with the advent of those technologies, we saw attackers' dwell times, the time they remained in the victim environment without being discovered, drastically reduced. And so I think there's a good argument to be made in the value of response. And there's a lot of talk on digital resilience now. In my mind, the way to define digital resilience is the combination of those two: prevention as well as detection and response. We need both. This goes across a lot of mindset around assume breach mentality, factors into resilience and detection and response. There's the old adage we call the defender's dilemma, which is if an attacker attacks 1,000 times, the defender needs to be successful in stopping all 1,000 attacks. But the
Hmm.
attacker only needs to be successful in getting in
Once.
one of those 1,000 attacks. So
Yeah,
we call that
true.
the defender's dilemma. And I would say that that is true for the prevention piece, right?
Yeah,
That is true for them trying to get them inside. But once they're actually inside the victim network, the defender's dilemma transforms to the defender's advantage, meaning that now the attacker's on the victim's home turf. And if the
mm,
victim has instrumented their network with detection and response technology, looking for that attacker, if the attacker makes 1,000 steps to completing their mission, all they have to do is one misstep and their
yeah,
activity is alerted. So in some sense, the detection and response is where the defender's advantage lives, right? So that's a little bit of, I guess, philosophy on prevention, response, and resilience. Now, how does AI play into that as well? I would say a lot of the AI use cases are in the detection and response portion. Of course, we've got malware detection on the prevention side, but it really comes down to investigation, right? So AI aided investigation. When you're investigating, you might, for example, say, okay, we've identified this threat actor. Who is this threat actor? Do some investigation to try and have an attribution of who the threat actor is. Threat intelligence can help with that. AI summarization can help with that. Once you understand who the threat actor is, then how does this threat actor operate? How do they, what are the steps they take for post exploitation? And again, AI summarization can help with that. And then AI investigation can go take those steps and look at um, potentially how to intercept that attacker again before they go and ransom the servers or steal the data or whatever it may be that they're trying to do to complete the mission.
yeah. You oversee a very diverse region with varying levels of digital maturity. So, how distinct are the challenges that you're seeing in this region?
Yeah, a lot of times uh, I see a tendency to try and align cyber issues to physical geography, right? My
Hmm.
country, my borders. How is it?
Yeah.
What are the cyber threats that apply to my specific country?
Hmm.
And I don't know how useful that exercise is at large. There are geopolitical tensions, and there are
Yeah.
cyber that attach to those geopolitical tensions. So yes, in that aspect, it does make sense to look at geography. But for things like ransomware, things like attacker techniques, they're pretty universal.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter where the ransomware is. On the internet, there are no borders and there is no
Yeah.
distance. And
Yeah.
so every attacker is your neighbor.
Mm.
The barbarians are at the doorstep, and it is just a matter of them reaching out to the right IP address to try and attack. So I think there needs to be balance. I think there is value in doing a threat profile and maybe looking at geography is part of that threat profile. But probably more important of that threat profile is what is your industry? What are your business assets? What are the threats to your specific business? And understanding some of those aspects as well.
Also, with the APAC region, slightly, as you mentioned, the geopolitical scene is changing. It's getting a little bit tense because of multiple reasons. So, are you, for instance, seeing you know uh, are you seeing the threat landscape become a little bit more serious when it comes to governments and organizations which are working with the government?
Yeah, I think, cyber is always going to follow the geopolitical
Yeah,
tensions. There's lots of ways that it can do that. There's pre-positioning in networks. So there's been a lot of news recently about a threat actor called a Volt Typhoon, which
yeah,
is pre-positioning in critical infrastructure networks, potentially for um, preparing for any sort of armed conflict happening in the Asia Pacific region. So that pre-positioning may be one aspect. Information operations is another view. So sowing division, winning the hearts of minds of populations through inauthentic material, either where the material itself is inauthentic or the person portraying themselves, the one posting that material, the poster is inauthentic as well. And so there's a number of things that Mandiant and Google Cloud track. And you can see, for example, Google Cloud Google releases a quarterly threat report that talks about all the information operations happening on Google properties like YouTube and ads and the
Yeah.
takedown efforts that we have related to those.
So, how is Mandiant working with corporations and governments to ensure that everybody is ahead of the curve? And is it limited to having, let's say, that is it necessary for that organization to be fully plugged to the Google infrastructure to be able to leverage what you guys do?
Yeah. I don't think any organization is on a single cloud or a
Yeah,
single
yeah,
vendor,
true,
right?
true.
I
Yeah,
think the vast majority are going to be multi-cloud, and we realize that. And we realize that, it's not a good approach if we say the security we bring only applies to the
yeah.
technologies we offer. And so that's not our approach, right? Our approach is to
Mm,
secure the entire environment, be that Google Cloud or multi-cloud or even on-premise. And that's our approach there. And to the extent of how is Mandiant doing that, again, there's a number of ways. So we talked about tabletop exercises. This is one
yeah,
good way at the business decision leaders way to be ready, more ready for that decision making. Another way that Mandiant helps is through red team exercises. So, red team is a bit like a penetration test. I think of a penetration test as, can I get in? Can I break in? Can I penetrate?
yeah,
But a red team goes further than that. A red team says, well, can I get in? But could I also impact the business? So once I'm inside, could I access the customer information? Could I access the critical production servers and potentially disrupt them? Now, of course, we don't do those things. We stop short of impacting the business, but we see if it's possible. And if it is possible, we explain how it's possible so that those windows can be closed so that when the real world attacker comes, those avenues aren't open. We're also helping companies that are thinking about AI. Right, so
yeah,
AI brings its own set of security challenges. You have to worry about things that maybe you didn't worry about before, things like prompt injection attacks on AI, and so we can provide consultancy around, are you doing all the right things to make sure that your AI workloads are properly protected. We also do AI red teaming. So that same red team that I talked about, we can take those red teams and point them at your AI workloads to see if we can cut the corners and circumvent the protections that are there. And then the last bit we do around AI is helping the defenders understand if they're using AI in a way that maximizes their efficiency, right? So some of the things that we were talking about before around AI use cases in the Security Operations Center, are you aware of all those things? Are you using them? Are you using them appropriately? And we can provide consultancy there. Those are some of the ways, but again, there are many, many things. Mandiant's been around for more than 20 years now, and
20
we've
years.
seen the asks from clients, and we've taken what we see benefits those clients the most and turn them into, probably close to three dozen different proactive services.
So, as we wind up, one last question. We mentioned and we spoke about how the threat landscape is evolving, but the fact is that AI is also making companies evolve. They are like going out of the comfort zones, doing things completely differently. Entire processes are being changed. Is that a new challenge that you have to be aware of, or is it again, because the entire thing is also maybe on the cloud, and is that easier to do? Is it easier to do now than it would have been before?
I think you're right, right? So AI is disrupting, and
Yeah,
we will see substantial change as this paradigm shift with AI plays out. And it opens new security concerns. So we need to think carefully about those. So, for example, um, Google Cloud has recently announced a capability called AI protection,
yeah.
which looks at all the various levels of the AI platform to make sure they're secure, not just the model, but the infrastructure, the data, all the various pieces. And so that's one capability. Part of that is a technology we have called Model Armor, which looks at the prompts coming into the model, making sure that they're appropriate, they aren't malicious, they aren't trying to do prompt injection, but also looking at the responses and checking those to make sure that there's no business risk being posed in the responses as well. So, these new capabilities being brought out with AI need to be protected through new tools, new AI protection based tools as well.
So, Steve, I'm sure our listeners have opened up their minds on
Mm.
the new possibilities as well as the new challenges, and I'm sure companies also need to start thinking very differently. And they have partners like you out there who could help them, uh, take on these new challenges. So, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks so much for the time. I've enjoyed our discussion, and hopefully we can catch up sometime in the future.
You were listening to Steve Ledzian on our own devices. We'll be back again next week with another guest, lot more knowledge and insight. Till then, we are available everywhere you listen to your pods.